Hey guys, welcome to She Knows Arsenal. My name is Jessica. I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at Justino Tweets and at She Knows Arsenal. Welcome to another episode of the show. We're going to be doing a little bit of a transfer roundup. Light, easy show. Can't lie, still feeling very, relaxed and happy off of the back of the win against Fulham. So, this is a little bit of a filler episode. Usually I don't do shows, I think, on Tuesdays, but I'm doing one today because there's a little bit of stuff to talk about. So make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel. On this show, we're going to be chit-chatting around Denzel Dumfries. He's been linked to Arsenal, the right wing back at Inter Milan, Dutch international. I think he's 27 or 28 years old. So we'll talk about him, as well as Florian Balogun, who is getting lots of attention. He scored another goal for Reims at the weekend, and he has 16 goals, I think, on the season. He's one of the biggest up-and-coming talents, and a lot of teams are interested in him. Surprise, surprise. And so we're going to chit chat around, what do you think should happen with Florian Balogun? Should we keep him? If a good bid comes in, should we sell? Or maybe should we shift some things around to accommodate him within the squad for next season in Champions League? So we'll talk about that as well. And Kieran Tierney, the reports keep coming. Ben Jacobs has even echoed what other big outlets have been saying around Kieran Tierney and him being at the top of Eddie Howe's list for the summer transfer window, which I know will upset a lot of Arsenal fans, but everybody's not going to come on the ride. So we have to talk about it. So yeah, make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you guys think in the chat. Let's see what you guys are saying. Errol says, Jess, I just wanted to know, did you go to the London Awards last night? AFTV were there. Great night for Arsenal. I was not there. I was at home watching Last of Us. But no, I was not there, but I saw all of the videos and pictures that were taken on the night. Arsenal obviously made a clean sweep. Mikel Arteta was named Manager of the Year. Bukayo Saka was named Men's Young Player of the Year. Aaron Ramsdale was named Goalkeeper of the Year, and Martin Odegaard was named the Premier League Player of the Year. So Arsenal was really, really, present in that whole thing yesterday. And so I'm happy for the players, and I hope it's a sign, and the manager, and I hope it's a sign for the future that many big things are coming in the future. So just to go ahead and jump in, hold on really quick, you guys. Give me 1 second. Let me just pull up the report first so I can make sure I have the right information. So the information around Denzel Dumfries is coming from Peter O'Rourke. And so if you don't know who Peter O'Rourke is, he's not a super well-known journalist, but he works for Footy Insider. And so Footy Insider 247, they kind of work under like this guise of like having these secret, kind of like leaks and having people that they talk to on the slide to get information and things like that. But in reality, they're a group of journalists, and they're putting out the information that they're getting from whatever sources they have. And Peter O'Rourke happens to be one of those people. And so it's not the first time we've been linked to Denzel Dumfries, but the first couple of times that we were linked to him, I did kind of just push it to the side because I didn't really know what Arteta was looking for in a right back. This was pre-Ben White, around the time where Bellerin was at the club. So nobody really knew what kind of right back we were looking at. And so when you look at Denzel Dumfries, he's a player that really stood out to me in the World Cup. So the Dutch, they were all right in the World Cup. They weren't amazing, but they were all right. They have some really talented players. We know Cody Gakpo and Depay and Frankie de Jong and these guys. And then Denzel Dumfries playing as like a right back, right wing back. He's a very athletic, quick, big, strong player that likes to get into the attack and score goals. He does something very similar for Inter Milan. And so he is the type of right back that I think a lot of Arsenal fans would be interested in, because there is kind of an undercurrent of, well, we need a more attacking right back. We need a more attacking right back. I've seen that online. I've seen that amongst Arsenal fans. I've seen it in group chats. So I know people feel that way. And so the Denzel Dumfries link might come like, seem interesting from an Arsenal perspective. Let's see what you let me. I just want to make sure I have all the right information. So apparently, Arsenal are among the Premier League sides considering a summer move for Inter Milan defender Denzel Dumfries. Sources have told Football Insider, it is believed Mikel Arteta is eyeing an out-and-out right back with UCL participation on the cards next season. So it is interesting because I do think that we are going to need another fullback, whether that fullback is a right back or a left back. I think that has a lot to do with Kieran Tierney, and we'll talk about him as well in just a second too. But I do think that variation is cool. Like, you want to have different types of players for different types of scenarios, right? There's almost a school of thought from some Arsenal fans that we need a bigger, taller striker just in case, so we can, move things around and change them and kind of have a different look. But we were heavily linked to Ivan Fresneda in the summer or in January. And that's a player that I do think fits more of the mold of what we're looking for, maybe in a right back, somebody that can play a little bit tucked in, but can also add to the attack. Kind of like Ben White, but a little bit more of a natural right back. When I look at Denzel Dumfries, I see a weapon, somebody that if you were to put him on in the last couple of minutes of a game, or, you're playing against a team that gave you a lot of space in wide areas, he'd be really interesting because kind of like Kieran Tierney, like he bombs forward, he gets into the attack, he puts in good balls and stuff like that. But we don't really play that way. We don't really play that way. And so even though I think a right back is on the cards, I think more of a tucked in midfielder, technical right back is on the cards rather than a more overlapping, athletic, bombing forward right back, because that's kind of why Kieran Tierney is not so involved in the team, is because those types of characteristics don't actually fit with what we're trying to do. So although this is an interesting link, and I think Denzel Dumfries is a good player, I'm not convinced that he's the right type of player for this team and this project because, it also, is he going to want to play a bit part role? Because Ben White is probably going to start. So I imagine that we are looking at a right back. What I think happens is, and this is just me kind of thinking to myself, is that once you sell Kieran Tierney, then Tomiyasu becomes the backup left back. And when Tomiyasu is playing, you're going to want more of a adventurous right back on the other side, because you don't really want to play Ben White and Tomiyasu, right? It's fine, but you want to have that balance of having one kind of tucked in and more of a center back, and then the other one being more of a midfielder. We have that now. Zinchenko, he's basically a midfielder next to Thomas Partey dictating play. And then you have Ben White a little bit tucked in, and he picks and chooses his times to go forward. With Tomiyasu, if he's playing the Ben White role on the left-hand side, in order to get that midfield role kind of sorted on the other side, you would need somebody more like an Ivan Fresneda. We've also been linked to Tino. Why is it's escaping me now? The right back from Southampton, who plays similar as well. So from my perspective, it's more of finding, if we have to play Tommy, if we play Tommy on the left-hand side, how do we balance things out and make sure that we have that additional midfielder coming from the back line? And that's not necessarily a Denzel Dumfries, who's more similar to Tierney. It's going to be more of like an Ivan Fresneda type. So I would say not really interested in this link, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not looking at a right back. Let's see what you guys are saying. Boy is saying, do we need a right back with Tomiyasu in the house? Well, Tomiyasu is kind of like our Ake, I think, in a way, where he's a really good defender. He can get forward a little bit, but that's not really what you want him to do. But he kind of plays a couple of different roles in that back line. He can be a center back. He can play on the left. You have Kyle Walker, who can kind of do similar things. I think Tomiyasu is more of going to be like our kind of like a Swiss Army knife at the back. He can play center back. He can play right back, he can play left back, but he allows you to bring in another person on the right to get that balance just in case he's playing on the left. And so I do think we need another fullback, especially if we move Kieran Tierney on. I don't think a left back is necessary, but a right back, I feel like that's the opportunity that we're going to look at. Boy also says, it's suspect selling KT. There's minutes for him next season with Champions League and a better squad to get further in more competition. So we'll chit chat about that in just a second as well. But yeah, Kieran Tierney is definitely, I think, the key to what happens at right back. And although I do see that there's minutes available to him, I do have a theory on why it is probably just better to move him on anyway. So Denzel Dumfries is probably not going to happen, but the next thing that I do want to chit chat about is Balogun. Actually, we'll do Balogun last. We'll talk about Kieran Tierney now because I feel like that's what people really want to talk about. Like Boy is saying here, this selling KT, there's going to be minutes for him Champions League wise next season. And I do agree with you on that there's going to be minutes for him to play. And just like this season, he's been able to play early stages of the Europa League. He might even play on Thursday. So there is an opportunity for him to play. I think just my feeling on it is that when you watch Kieran Tierney play for Arsenal right now, he plays tucked in like Zinchenko. And that's not the best use of his assets. Like his best assets are overlapping, getting into the attack, putting crosses in, beating his man on the left-hand side. Those are his key assets. And even though Arsenal do need a little bit of variation, I think we need to accept that Arteta is wedded to inverted fullbacks. I don't think we're ever going to see Arsenal, not in the short term at least, with overlapping fullbacks bombing on. It's not going to be like that, you know? And so our fullbacks aren't even really in our lanes, attacking lanes anymore. It's really the three up front plus the 2 8s. So those are our 5 attacking lanes, and then you have the 2 at the back, and then you have the fullbacks kind of filling in midfield. It's a different vibe now, and so Kieran Tierney came in under Unai Emery, so he's not an Arteta signing, but he's been phenomenal for us, just even though he's had his injury issues. But now that the way that we're playing has changed, I see less and less opportunities for him to be the best Kieran Tierney possible playing in the way that we play. He does not have the same level technical wise to play the Zinchenko role. That's why they're looking at Ivan Fresneda for the other side, so that you can have a similar type of vibe on the other side. But Tierney doesn't have that at all. He's doing a good job to try to adapt to it so that he can play those minutes. But even looking at it from the other direction, if I'm Kieran Tierney and I'm 26, 27 years old, I'm in my prime, I'm a Champions League level left back, unless you're going to play to my strengths, you know, I wouldn't really want to sit on Arsenal's bench. That's not because, you know, we're going to win trophies and, you know, that's fine. But I think he wants to be involved. And if I was him in my prime, I would want to be involved. So if you could go to a Newcastle and they play in a way that would really suit Kieran Tierney with fullbacks getting up. I mean, I've seen Dan Burn overlap. You know, and the next stage probably for Eddie Howe is to get another fullback on the other side, drop Dan Burn, and get more of an attack going from that way. I mean, on a counter-attacking side, Kieran Tierney would be absolutely devastating. So I do think from that perspective that Kieran Tierney's best attributes don't suit the way that we play, and the fact that he's too good of a left back to be sitting on our bench, plus the fact that Newcastle and other Premier League teams are probably the only ones that will be able to afford Kieran Tierney's wages and the necessary fee attached to bringing him to their club. I do think that there's a perfect storm kind of brewing in the summer to move Kieran Tierney on before it's too late. In a couple of seasons' time, when he's 29, he's not going to be, you're not going to be able to move him on. But right now, where the stock is high, where he's still in his prime, where a lot of Premier League clubs would probably be looking around like, hey, this guy is just sitting around on Arsenal's bench. Why don't we use him? Why don't we try to bring him in? I think it's a good time to maybe do that. I caveat all of this by saying that I love Kieran Tierney, and he's always been one of my favorite Arsenal players, and I would be devastated to see him go. But I care about Arsenal more than I care about individual players. And if moving Kieran Tierney on allows us to recoup a fee and bring in a player that suits us better, that's what I want. And so I do see where this becomes somewhat of a perfect storm for Kieran Tierney to move on. But I also understand why Arsenal fans would be upset, because there's also that underlying aspect of, you know, improving the opposition. We've seen with our own team, that I'm sure that there's been many a conversation in the Man City boardroom about giving us Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus and them instantly being able to compete with them just by bringing in two of their players. And so I do understand there's an aspect of improving your opposition. And I do think Kieran Tierney with, Kieran Trippier and, Fabian Schär and Sven Botman is a really formidable back line and can really take them, to another level. So I understand that aspect of things as well. Ben Jacobs says that Kieran Tierney could leave Arsenal after seeing his minutes diminish this season. Tierney held face-to-face talks with Arteta to better understand his future and was encouraged to fight for his place, so an exit is not guaranteed. Even Arteta is undecided to whether to let him go, but it will also come down to whether Tierney is satisfied with being a squad player. So nothing really new there. I'm sure Arteta would want to keep him because I think Arteta wants a really strong squad where he's not, after a couple of injuries, looking at kids to bring in into, cup games and things like that. But at the same time, from a Kieran Tierney perspective, does he want to just sit on our bench? Akinola says, if Kieran Tierney goes, it would make me sad, but I hope Arteta can find him a much better club. Then at least I would be happy for him. Boy says, let KT go to Atletico. Errol says, Dan Burn for Newcastle is not brilliant, Jess. Well, I don't think that he's brilliant necessarily. I just think that he's done a good job. And then if they bring in Kieran Tierney, that's going to take them to another level. So I don't think Dan Burn has been brilliant, but a lot of their back line has been pretty good, C. Wilder says, I have Newcastle made and he is clucking for Tierney. I mean, everybody sees it. It's a perfect fit. It feels very similar to when we were starting getting linked to Gabriel Jesus in March of last season. And I was like, that feels like a good fit for us. And it might just work. But at the same time, like the fee has to be right and things like that. It has to feel worth it from an Arsenal perspective because you are strengthening a rival. And Newcastle are looking at Kieran Tierney and James Maddison. And that feels very similar to what we did, bringing in players that have played in this league before that, are seasoned and know what they're doing. And if you put a Maddison next to Bruno Guimaraes and then, you have Kieran Tierney replace Dan Burn, I mean, Newcastle are going to be formidable next season, but we have to back ourselves in what we're doing enough to feel like we're moving fast enough in a good direction where giving them a player of Tierney's stature is not going to derail us in any sort of way. Dominic says, I miss when KT was future captain candidate, but I think the squad quality has passed him. It's also the aspect of Kieran Tierney can't stay fit, and your captain cannot be somebody that's constantly injured. They have to be able to play most games. And I think Arteta made the right decision. Odegaard as captain feels right. And there was a little bit of time where it felt like Kieran Tierney was that guy for us, but he's just not. And so yeah, I mean, what can you really do? He's been replaced in the first 11. I think he's more fit now than he was in previous seasons because he's not playing so many minutes. So, I did love that time where we felt like Kieran Tierney would be captain, but at the same time, like, sometimes you just have to move on. Ify says, Newcastle following our footstep, Arsenal is the blueprint. When you bring in players that have been in the league before, you do kind of, it's a good mixture of players from outside of the league, plus, some really key pieces in your team from within the league. You really can build like a solid foundation quickly doing those things, and so Newcastle, they're smart. They're smart. I think bringing in Eddie Howe was smart. I think not spending money silly is smart. I think looking at players that are kind of on the outskirts of Premier League sides and or the best player off of some Premier League sides and bringing them into their team is a smart plan. There's nothing, you really can do about it. I rate Eddie Howe as well, Seawalder. I thought he was so good at Bournemouth. When he was managing Bournemouth, I thought, he was really, really good. And so I know they're going to do well with him. And I am a little bit like, oh, I don't really want to be strengthening them. But at the same time, like, Kieran Tierney to Newcastle feels like a good fit. And again, if you want to move players on, especially from the Premier League, because the rest of Europe is so kind of like, they don't have the facilities to bring in players on those types of wages. So you're looking at, that's why the Premier League is so strong. You end up selling and buying from each other. And then, what can you do? Arsenal could demand a fee in excess of 25 million. They paid Celtic in 2019. 35 to 40 million is probably the starting point, especially given Kieran Tierney is healthy, contracted until 2026. Newcastle's interest is genuine. So giving Tierney that new contract was significant because then it's a longer contract. You can ask for more. He's in his prime and Newcastle have the money. And that's my one thing, is that I would not sell him if I did not get 40 million at the very least. We see players like Cucurella and these guys going for like very cheap. And I'm sure Manchester City are kicking themselves in the ass right now because they gave us Zinchenko for 30 million and he's probably worth significantly more than that. So 40 million has to be the starting point, and Newcastle have the money to spend on Kieran Tierney. So we should not be giving him away for free. 40 million is the starting point. I'd be looking for something between 40 and 45 million, to be honest. Because if you get that amount of money for him and you can bring in a replacement and then funnel that through, we need 2 midfielders potentially in the summer. And we also need, a right winger, and that right winger is not going to be cheap. So we need to be able to move players on for good fees. And this is a really big test for Edu. He's done a really good job up until this point, but we all know that next step is when you have assets that you can actually sell. Can you get a decent fee for them? And so Kieran Tierney might be the first kind of test for that. And we have a decent relationship with Newcastle because they bought Willock. Boy says KT to Newcastle is dangerous for us. Need to have a real bad man coming in to replace him. Crispy says, I really don't want to sell him. If we do it, better be for a hefty fee. I agree. Errol says Spurs are interested in the Villa goalkeeper, Jess. Yeah, I've seen that. Emi Martinez is linked with Spurs, and he's been linked with them for a while. I expect something like that to happen. Don't get your hopes up about Martinez being loyal to Arsenal. He doesn't give a shit about us, and I definitely see him going there in the future, 100%. Let's see. Phil says, why sell Tierney? We need a better squad next season than this season for CL. Why should we sell any of our good players? Because we've moved into a different space. I kind of like explained this a little bit earlier, but the way that we play now is different than the way that we played when Kieran Tierney was like our number one chance creator. There was a time, I think it was in the season, where Saka and Smith Rowe in the second half of the season, when we finished 8th, where he was a big part of everything that we did, because we didn't have a creative midfielder. We didn't have, Ozil was dropped out of the squad. William was terrible. And we just had Smith Rowe and Saka. And so the other player that was helping us create chances was Kieran Tierney. And our season kind of lived and died with his injuries. If he was not available, we were effed. But there were games where he would create 2, 3, 4 really good chances for us, and he was so important. Then the next season came around, and we bought Ben White, we bought Ramsdale, we bought Odegaard, we got Tavares and Sambi, albeit they're not really that involved. But the Tomiyasu, Ben White, Ramsdale, and Odegaard signings really changed the way that we played. And so now that we have creativity coming from the central part of our team through our 8s, through, our, Zinchenko, through these types of players, there's not really a need for the bombing forward fullback that's going to be kicking the ball into the box, because we don't even have a center presence like that to get on the end of those types of crosses. We have evolved beyond that way of playing. And so I see less and less time for Tierney in the team because of the way that we play, not because he's not a talented player and not because we don't need depth, but because when he plays in left back, he plays inverted. the fact that Arteta doesn't even let him play the way that he plays best when he plays for Arsenal shows you that Arteta is wedded to inverted fullback. So why not move Tierney on and bring in another inverted fullback? And then you have Tomiyasu, Zinchenko, Ben White, and another player that all play the way that we play. And you don't have a player being, square peg and round hold in order to use them. So I don't think it's a matter of like, we're going to be one less fullback because Kieran Tierney is not there. We will bring somebody else in, hence the conversation around, a right back, comes to the forefront a little bit more. But I understand this, and I feel like this makes sense to me, even though it's going to be painful, because from here on out, you guys, anybody that leaves Arsenal that's a significant part of the team, it's going to hurt us. It is. Like anybody from here on out, because we love this team. It's different. It's different now than when we had players that we didn't feel connected to. It's different now. We have players that we love, that we're really connected to. And so anybody from this point forward, it's going to hurt badly. And so we just have to be kind of ready for that. But I also stand very firm in like my belief that everybody's not going to come with us. And that's fine, Boy says Arteta needs to coach his own inverted fullback. I don't know, like what do you mean by that? He needs to coach his own inverted fullback. What do you mean by that? Because Arteta has done a really good job with Tierney to help him play more inverted, but it's just not a natural fit. And if you're saying that he like needs to be able to mold his own players, I kind of agree with that because Arteta likes to like make players. Like it's very clear. And Phil, thank you for, your question. And this is the thing is like, I don't blame any Arsenal fan for being alarmed by Kieran Tierney potentially leaving the club, but I give my 2 cents on it. And if you agree with it, fair. If you don't, fair. I'm just giving kind of like my feelings on it and why I think these things are happening. Matt G says also keeping unhappy players is damaging for the squad. I agree with that as well. I think you don't want to bring in, you don't want to keep players around that maybe are not 100% happy. And I'm not saying that Kieran Tierney is not, but if he is not, then you want to make, we've always kind of made the right decisions in those aspects. If a player was unhappy at being at Arsenal, we've kind of always made the right decision to move them on and let them be happy somewhere else. So the Kieran Tierney discussion, I do think is going to go for a long time. I expect there to be some jitters going into the summer window, but my only caveat for any of this is that we should not be recouping 20 million for Kieran Tierney. If he gets sold for anything around 20 million, it's wrong. It's not good enough. He should be going for 40 million minimum. I don't care if he's injury prone. I've seen injury prone players go for, significant fees anyway. Like I don't care. He needs to go for a significant amount of money. But, if he leaves, I will shed a tear. Boy says basically Arteta should get himself a young attacking fullback, wingback, train them on the opposite side. And that's exactly what I think Arteta wants to do and why we were so interested in Ivan Fresneda. He's 18, he's technically gifted, and we were also linked with Tino Livramento at Southampton. Both players are very similar. They're kind of midfielders that play as fullbacks, kind of similar to Zinchenko, but on the other side, they can get forward. They're the type of players that can find a pass in that final third. And that's what Zinchenko does so well. When he gets into that left half space, he can find those little slip balls and be another playmaker. If you have Tomiyasu on one side, he's not really going to be doing that, but you need to balance that out on the other side and have somebody that can. And so that's why I see more of an Ivan Fresneda type who is 18 that can be molded, but will also probably be okay with sitting behind Ben White more often than not. Don't think you want to bring in somebody that, is prime age, that plays a certain way that can't be molded because this is a very specific position. But that feels like a good balance to me. Tomiyasu kind of being the Swiss Army knife back there, Zinchenko being the starting left back, Ben White being the starting right back. Then you have like a younger, very talented player behind Ben White. And then you have Kivior as well. And, so you start building that next layer of defensive cover with the strong players still up front. So it's, we're building, for sure. We're building. Not Focal says facts. Seawalder says Fresneda, exactly. And Kedia's lawyer says Dumfries is Nuno 2.0. Don't need him at Arsenal. That is also something that we haven't talked about in a while is Nuno Tavares. So Nuno started off like a house on fire at Marseille, but there's more and more articles and blurbs coming out about them not liking him very much, and he is more than likely coming back to Arsenal in the summer. It's so weird that, a lot of people were like, oh, we need to keep him. He scored so many goals, but like at Arsenal where he was kind of decent going forward, he doesn't really have the defensive, positioning and awareness to play in that position. And he's even been pushed forward at Marseille at some points as a winger. And my belief is that a lot of players, and this is because like I've lived through this experience myself, is when you're a young player, you want to play on the wing, and the less technically gifted you are and the less good you are as a winger, they start to push you further and further back until you become a fullback. And to me, that's what's happened to Nuno Tavares. He's a young player that was supposed to be playing wing. And because he wasn't good enough to play as a winger, they pushed him back to play fullback. He's not quite defensively sound enough to do that. But luckily, in the era that we live in now, there's 3 at the back formations where he can play as a wing back. And that suits him a lot better than playing in a back 4. So from a perspective of him playing as a winger, which I've seen some people say we should use him as a winger. No, keep Nelson. There's no, if I had to choose between Nuno and Nelson, it's not even a contest. I'm choosing Nelson. Nelson is way better as a winger than Nuno Tavares, and I don't need to see it to know it. And then Nuno as a fullback is never going to work. Even in the way that we play now, and as like people say, like Zinchenko is defensively like a liability. He may not be amazing defensively, but his awareness is there, and he knows kind of like how to play the system and how to exist within that space to make sure we don't get killed. Nuno, for me, doesn't really have that at all. And so he's another player that I'm looking at the summer, like he's going, he's going to go. He didn't really work out. And guess what? We took a punt on him. He was 6 million, pounds or whatever. It's not that big of a deal, but I'm not surprised that what is being said at Marseille is being said because it's what we knew when he was at Arsenal. And quite frankly, if you don't go to Marseille and kick off kind of like, Guendouzi and Saliba, I do think that says something because when our players go to Marseille, they do well. And they stay there for a couple of years, and the teams usually are desperate to buy them. If Marseille is not desperate to buy you, it is what it is, So Nuno will probably come back, but I think he'll be on the sale list as well. And I think something, maybe not mentality-wise, but maybe attitude-wise as well, was not quite right with Nuno, but I don't think he's coming back. But if you move Tierney and Tavares on, and, Ainsley Maitland-Niles will probably be gone as well, there's some room to bring in, a good young fullback, Gunny says Tavares, Lakanga Holding all need to be moved on and replaced with better players. Tavares and Lakanga, I do agree with. I think Nuno will probably be sold and Lakanga might be loaned out, another year or so. With Holding, I have to tell you guys that as in the past, if you guys have been here, I've been like, he has to go. I don't think he's going anywhere. I think Arteta values the culture guys in the team, and we probably won't have El Neni, and there'll probably always be like one of these guys hanging around. It doesn't hurt the overall team in my book to have one of these players around. It's not amazing. It's not, you don't love to see Holding coming in, but the way that we're building the squad, there's not going to really be that many times where you're going to see him. You probably won't see him at all, but he is valuable to the squad in terms of being like a culture type of guy. He puts people puts arm around the shoulder. Arteta really trusts him. And so, yeah, I don't see Holding going anywhere, but the other ones I do. Especially Nuno, I think he's gone. Phil says, agree, Nuno isn't going to work at left back for us under Arteta. He might be a decent squad player to bring off of the bench as a defensive left midfielder. He'll have a good career elsewhere, though. Boy says Patino could solve one of our midfield recruitments. Personally, I think Patino needs to stay out a little bit longer, but I completely understand feeling like Patino has a place in this team, because I agree. I think he does. Maybe not in the short term, but in a season or so. Ify says, what happens to Reiss Nelson? Will he leave as well? Sammy McBell and some other well-known journalists have already kind of said that Reiss Nelson is in contract talks with Arsenal. And for me, that makes things so interesting, because I actually thought Reiss Nelson had a really good cameo against Fulham. And do I think that he's going to be a Saka Martinelli type? No. But is it nice to have good squad players in your team that kind of come from Hale End, so they're always kind of bought into what you're doing? Yes. I think all of our best teams have always had squad players that were from Hale End, and Reiss Nelson can kind of be that. He plays like us. He's kind of versatile, like he can play on both sides, and he's technically good enough to play. So I think Reiss Nelson getting a longish, shortish deal on very little money and sticking around a little bit longer is good for Arsenal in terms of filling up squad positions. So that's what I think will happen with Nelson. He wants to stay, and I think Arteta just wanted to see a level of commitment from him in terms of being serious about his career first and foremost before he wanted to push forward with Reiss Nelson. Steve says, unfortunately, for Arsenal to keep evolving, we have to be ruthless. Sorry, Nuno. John says, we can get a young player that can replace Holding. He's holding us back, and he will play sometimes. Is he holding us back? I'm not sure. I think Aubameyang, Lacazette, these guys were kind of holding us back because they were taking up huge wages and they were starting level players that didn't really play the way that we played, and they would need to play significant minutes. And so they were kind of holding us back. But holding us back doesn't necessarily, when he plays so little minutes, I don't think he's holding us back. If you've heard what Arteta has spoken about, and even Edu and stuff like that, they really value those culture guys, the Elnenis and the Holdings. Cedric before he left. And so I do think if Elneny and Cedric move on, they will keep one, and that will be Holding. And then eventually he'll be phased out over time. But I don't necessarily feel like Holding is holding us back. I think it's just kind of like, damn, when he comes out there, because that he's not amazing, but he really, I think I only remember one game where I thought he is getting on my nerves. And I think that was Europa League when we played against PSV, and it was him and Saliba, I think it was back there. No, I didn't like that. But when he played against, Manchester City in the cup at the Etihad, he wasn't bad. So I don't think he's holding us back. I think he's just a player that's not at the same level as everybody else. But even Man City for a while, before they got to this next stage, they had players in their team that weren't necessarily of the same level, like a Fabian Delph. That guy was not, number one, but when he was called upon, he did his job, and he was kind of like a culture guy, whatever. And so I think we will have one or two of those in the squad in the beginning phases, and they'll be slowly phased out as we go on. I don't think there's any sort of rush for Holding to leave from the club perspective. Boy says, wish Reiss was 3 years younger. Wouldn't have to consider registration slots. C says, I really, really hate to say it, but I don't think Eddie has the consistency either. We'll talk about Eddie in the conversation with Balogun in a second as well. Not Focal says, if we have defensive crisis, Holding is okay. It will be hard to find a better fourth or fifth choice CB who's okay not playing much. Phil says, Nelson, keep him. Of course, we need squad players from the youths. I kind of agree with that too. Tony says, Reiss can develop into a new Truss, but he needs minutes. I've been impressed with Reiss Nelson since coming in so far. I'd be very interested to see how he develops. He's not as young as the others, but he's not old either. So we'll see what happens with him. Not Focal says a young CB won't be okay on the bench. This is kind of my feeling as well. Like even Liverpool, like they kept around that one guy for a long time. What was his name? I forget what his name was, but he wasn't very good. But he was just kind of like there for a while. Like if you look at the beginning phases of Liverpool and Man City, there were little sprinkles of these guys in the team, and it didn't really hold them back. It's just, when they're playing, your level will go down just a little bit, but it kind of is what it is. Phil, this is the exact player I was thinking about. Ray Parlour was the only squad player at the beginning of Wenger's era, became a legend. And so you have some of these players in the team. Make sure you guys are liking the video. I can't even see how many of you guys are in here. It's weird. It says 0, but I know there's people in here. So it's crazy. I don't know why it's saying that. Actually, let me look on YouTube. Oh, there's like 100 of you guys in here. It doesn't feel like it. Maybe because you guys aren't like, are you guys commenting? Like, I know you guys are commenting, but like, get in there, Osman says, we don't have time for players to develop. We have a good youth team already. We need ready-made top players in the mold of Savage, Lafie, McAllister, Leao. Think bigger guys. Well, here's the thing. I agree, and I think when it comes to those big midfield signings that we're looking at, and the new attacker that's going to come in, those players are going to be significant signings. They're going to be big ones. We know that. But in terms of like a right back coming in, the way that Ben White is playing, like he's going to develop further. Ben White is still only 25, so he's going to develop further, and I think Ben White can definitely be a world-class, best in his position type right back. So do we need to bring in a Hakimi or somebody like that in behind him? No, you bring in the next group, couple years younger, staggered a little bit, so you keep your squad growing and evolving, kind of balanced. If you have too many players same ages, all prime age, I don't think that's the way to build the squad. You know what I mean? So Tamiyasu, Zinchenko, and Ben White are all kind of 25, 24, 25, 26 in that age range. And then if you have one young fullback, it's not going to kill you. It's really not, Seawalder says, problem is you could say Chelsea are thinking bigger in that sense, but is it working? Logic says, what do we think of Zaha and Tielemans on a free this summer? To me, Zaha needs to be wrapped up and put to bed. I don't see, I think from an Arsenal perspective, like there's a lot of Arsenal fans that are still kind of hung up on the idea of Zaha because he's an Arsenal fan and that was the player we were supposed to get instead of Pepe. But when I watch him at Crystal Palace, I feel like I'm looking at a player that's at his level. I think he is a mid-table kind of monster. Like there's always players at mid-table teams that can hurt you, and they, step up every once in a while and they stay there forever. Your Vardys, your Zahas, you're these types of guys. But I think from an Arsenal perspective, I don't see where he fits in. He's too individualistic. He doesn't work hard. To me, he's not a system player. And when I watch Vieira's Crystal Palace play, I do feel like I'm watching a bunch of individuals up front kind of doing their thing and just hoping something happens. There's no shade to Vieira, but Arsenal plays a very specific way, and I just don't see Zaha fitting into that, especially at his age. So I think the player that we brought in from like a mid-table team that's a little bit older that fits into the squad, we've already done it. It's Trossard. So we can move on from the Zaha thing. But the Tielemans, would I be interested in him in the summer? Yes, but low down the list. Like from me personally, McAllister would be my number one choice for an 8. I think he's perfect. Alexis McAllister for me is perfect for that position. I think we've seen that Brighton players play well at Arsenal, so it's a nice little, easy transition, but he's creative. He gets into the box. He scores goals. He's not so, prim and precious that he doesn't get stuck in. He does do the tackling and all that kind of stuff as well. He presses well. And so McAllister would be like my number one option. And then if you kind of go down the list a little bit more, Tielemans on a free would be on there. But I'm just concerned about Tielemans altogether because I'm like, can this guy be rehabilitated? It's been a long time since he's been in form. Does that make sense? So yeah, I'm gonna see what you guys are saying. Oh, now I'm seeing the names. I'm seeing them now. Jay says Zaha is past his prime! Exclamation point. C. Wilder says remember him at United. Yeah, Tony says we've moved way beyond Zaha. I was hyping Olise, but that penalty giveaway was a madness. It's not that I don't rate Olise, but I watch him and I just think, is he gonna press? Is he that kind of player? Like, can he play like that? I'm not sure. Gunny says, we have Martinelli, Trossard, ESR, Saka, who can all play left wing. We don't need Zaha. Right wing and striker are more important positions that require depth. Osman says, Jess, this summer should be our window. McAllister, Lafie, Rice, Fresneda, Tony. I hear you for sure. Logic said, true, agreed. Need a right wing or a new backup starter at striker more than Zaha, although I do believe he'd be a fine striker left wing depth signing for UCL. It's giving Richarlison for me, somebody that, yeah, it's kind of like a Richarlison type thing. I don't think he'd cost as much as Richarlison, but you'd probably get a similar vibe from that. It doesn't wash for me, but I get that people want to see like ready-made players coming in, and I'm sure we'll see that. But before we get into a little bit of just chit chat at the very end, I do want to talk about Balogun. He's making headlines again. He scored another goal at the weekend. He's looking like the real deal, and Arteta spoke about him and said that it's not just League One. Like, he could play in the Premier League, and he's happy about the way he's developing and stuff like that. Balogun looks like he does look like the real deal. So now teams are looking at him, and Newcastle are also looking at Balogun. I would not sell Balogun to Newcastle. I would not, but it's his 16th goal in League One. I mean, he's absolutely flying. He really, really is. And so he's also been linked to the big Milan clubs, Inter Milan and AC Milan, more the latter than the former. And we've seen some prices or some fees being banded around 25 million, 30 million, and people are not happy about that. I am so apprehensive about moving Balogun on. I really am. I think it would really scare me about what he could become, because the difference between like moving a Tierney on and moving a Balogun on is what Tierney is, so you kind of know about-ish what type of player you'd be selling to a Newcastle. But when you have a Balogun, you just don't know what he could become, and the last thing you want to see is another Gnabry situation where we're looking over yonder and there's a fantastic player somewhere else that we could have used, and he just looks like somebody that plays like the team that we have now. He comes deep from that center forward position. He links play, but he also has a deadly side. Like, he's almost like a really good combination of Gabriel Jesus and Nketiah. Obviously, there, people are like, there's league untaxed, but at the same time, I just think you can see that he has quality. And so I want to ask you guys, what do you think should happen with Balogun this summer? Do you think, we should move him on, strike while the iron is hot, kind of situation, and hope that you can get like 40 million for him? Do you think you bring him in, and see what he can do? Because from my perspective, like, if I'm looking at Balogun, I don't think he's going to be like, yeah, let me sit behind Eddie. Like, I just don't see that from a player of his level. He's went on loan several times to get playing time, so he's not going to go out to get playing time and then sit on our bench. So, but we did a lot to get him on a new deal, which makes me think that Arsenal have plans for him, but you just never really know. So I'm torn. I'm really torn, because I'm afraid that he's going to become a player that will feel like we should not have moved on. But at the same time, Eddie is there. And, what does that say about Eddie? Like, he's done so well this season, and I think it would be almost unfair to move him on in order to bring in Balogun when he's done so well. But at the same time, Eddie might want playing time, because right now, if I have to be honest, I think, Gabriel Jesus and Trossard are more compatible for the center forward position than Eddie is because of the connection with Martinelli. So it's interesting because something is going to change at center forward at the summer, I think, but I just don't know what. Akin says Arteta is smart and ruthless. He'll keep Balogun and sell Nketiah. C. Wilder says it's hard to judge because I bet Eddie could also smash in that league. That's very true. Tony says give Balogun a chance to steal Eddie's place. Saida says, for me, Balogun has a higher ceiling than Eddie. If we're selling, there should be a buyback clause included, but we don't tend to do that often. We'd have to do a buyback clause 100%. There'd have to be all types of clauses, a sell-on clause, a buyback clause, all that kind of stuff. Very similar to what Chelsea did with Tammy Abraham would probably be, a decent move. C. Wilder says, yeah, I really want to see Eddie and Balogun with an equal opportunity so we can compare them properly. Good shout, Tony. So Tony is basically saying, like, let him come back. Tony is also saying Clive really likes Balogun's soft feet. I think we give Eddie and Balogun a chance in preseason, and it will be obvious to Arteta who to keep. Battle of the fittest, or whatever it is. Whatever it is. Is it battle of the fittest? Battle of the fittest? Why does that feel right? Survival of the fittest. That's why. Survival of the fittest. I like that. Logic says, selling Nketiah, we could get 20 million easily for him and test Balogun out next season. DJ Dapp says, keep Balogun. Eddie has had his chances, but he's had his chances and he's taken them. That's my only thing, is that I can understand if Eddie had had chances and done poorly, but I think almost like recency bias as well has clouded a little bit of the judgment here as well. Like if we were talking about Eddie when he had just scored the goal against Manchester United in the final minutes of that game, I think we'd be less, desperate to move him on to keep Balogun because he was doing so well. And then he kind of faded a little bit and the Trossard came in, and then that feels like a better fit, so it's kind of like, okay, well, it's easier, especially he's out of sight, out of mind as well because he's not playing. But Arteta really likes Eddie and he fought hard for Eddie. So I wonder what's going to happen with that. But there will be plenty of minutes. My question is whether or not Balogun will want the limited minutes that he's given, or would he rather be somewhere else? I do think that there's a chance he could be moved on with like a buyback clause or something like that. But yeah, that would devastate me because I just have a feeling he's going to be an absolute star because he just looks mustard, doesn't he? Sin says if Newcastle had KT and Eddie, they're finishing top 4. It's weird because I don't see Eddie linked with anybody, so in the summer that might change, but if Eddie I want to see if Eddie gets linked with anybody, Yo-Yo says if there's long enough in Balogun's contract, then there's no rush with any decision. Yeah, that's true. Maybe you can send him on another loan, but you have to really hope for that patience. And maybe it's a little bit of the Saliba situation where, you send him out a couple of times and you just kind of keep nurturing that talent. And even though they're away, Akin says Eddie technically isn't quite good enough. He's not technically at the same level as Trossard and Gabriel Jesus, but I think he's improved. Boy says Eddie fell off after City and those misses, and he's just not clinical enough to be frank. But at the same time, Eddie had been kind of carrying an injury. The injury that he's suffering from now, he was already suffering from it before in the games where he looked like he fell off. So I want to be fair to Eddie. I just feel like, it's almost like recency bias as well a little bit. Akin says we've proven Nketiah isn't quite good enough. No need to keep him. The only thing with Eddie as well is that we've kind of tethered him to a contract that I think would make him a little bit difficult to move on in terms of his wages. Like if it is around £100,000 a week, I do think that kind of counts out some of those lower level Premier League teams that would be really interested in him. So you'd have to hope like an Aston Villa or a Newcastle or somebody with, some money, some cash would come in for him. Richie Rabbit says, next season, Balogun needs to be in the Premier League so we can assess him properly, not another inferior league. Gunny says, let's be real. If we win the Premier League this season, then next season the target is the CL. A player like Eddie isn't good enough in that situation, and Balogun isn't ready. We need someone as good as Jesus. Do you guys think there's a chance that Arsenal could bring in another striker or another center forward? I think it's pretty clear, or it feels pretty clear that a right winger will come in, but do you think that they'll invest in another center forward? We have been linked to a couple. I think Osimhen is way out of left field. I don't think we could bring him in, but maybe we do bring in another center forward type player. But at the same time, the way that we play doesn't really require a traditional number 9. So, I mean, we could, but I don't know. I mean, there's so many things that could happen, but we just have to see how it unfolds. Carl says these young players need an experienced player around them and need a player with strength and is aggressive. Come on, you Gunners. Richie Rabbit says, I've always liked Balogun, but is he the right type of player for a possession-based side? I think so. I mean, he's Hale End. So Hale End graduates usually do have a certain level of technical ability. And I think when I watch Balogun, I see a combination of Jesus and Eddie Nketiah. He has all the things. He can run in behind and be, somebody that plays off of the shoulder. He can also, hit the in the box scramble type of goals, and he can also finesse and drop in and link play. Like, he can do all those things. Gunny says Vlahovic is realistic in my opinion due to Juve's financial difficulties. My only issue with the likes of Osimhen and Vlahovic is if Harry Kane decides to stay at Tottenham, then the likes of Chelsea and Man United, who are desperate for a number 9, will probably be front of the line for those players. And so those players would likely go to a place where they're going to be the starting number 9 and not sharing minutes with Gabriel Jesus. So, and again, I've always kind of maintained this, and I do think people need to keep this front of mind, is that Gabriel Jesus was given the number 9. It's a significant number with a certain, connection to that number. We know that the number 9 is the striker. And the idea that we're going to buy Gabriel Jesus, a player that was unhappy at Manchester City because he was moved out to the wing and out of his central position, and we're going to do the exact same a year after and move him out wide to, bring in a traditional number 9, I think that's very unlikely. So that's why I don't actually believe a center forward will come in, because a good center forward that, can be starting at another Premier League side is probably not going to come and sit on Arsenal's bench. And we have Eddie and we have Balogun, and I think it's more likely that we address right wing, a position that we've been desperate. I mean, Pedro Neto had a 60 million pound fee. We were willing to spend 40 million or something on him. We tried to go for Rafinha twice, not just in the summer, but also in January. We're also linked with Moussa Diaby. That's going to cost you 55 to 60 million. So I actually think the money in attack is going to be spent, especially because we found Trossard as a center forward option. Let's be real. He's really good there. I think you address right wing. Center forward doesn't really get addressed. And then you also go big in midfield, because that feels like more of a priority. But I really do understand people's Eddie is not good enough. Balogun is too young. Yo-Yo says, if Arsenal are Prem winners, then neither Eddie nor Balogun are leaving the club this summer. Saida says, I don't see another center forward coming in. Trossard will be a utility player. Exactly. I agree. Matt G says, we won't be able to convince the likes of Vlahovic and Osimhen to join and share minutes with Jesus. Exactly. Boy says Balogun and ESR will cover some goals for next season. I mean, yeah, that's why Arteta loves those players that are so versatile, is because then they can, I think Trossard and probably Tomiyasu are the best examples of that in the squad right now. Tommy can cover both sides of the fullbacks, and Trossard can cover pretty much all of the positions up front. And we probably, could have Vieira and ESR also become those types of players as well. So I don't think we're going to see a center forward come in, especially for the way that we play. All this Tony talk and all this kind of stuff, I think that's not happening, Phil says, for that reason, I think Eddie will be the backup unless a new top striker comes in. Exactly. Tony says CM, right wing 2, left back 2. Exactly. Oh, my HelloFresh is here. You can just drop it. Do you guys do HelloFresh? It's actually really cool. I actually really like it. Just leave it. Damn. Knocking on my door. All right. So yeah, CM, right wing 2, left back 2. Exactly. And the majority of the funds are going to be spent on the center midfielder and the right winger for sure. Saida, yes, I have spoken about Dumfries at the very top of the show. We're actually going to go ahead and get out of here. So if you want to just rewind to the beginning, I spoke for about 10 minutes about what kind of player he is and kind of like my feeling on if that will happen or not. You know what I mean? But we're gonna go ahead and get out of here, you guys. I just wanted to do a short little pop in about like the transfers. I talked about Dumfries at the beginning, and then we spoke about Tierney, and then we finished off with Balogun. So if you're just joining us, rewind it, go back to the beginning, and take a little look. Tomorrow, the preview will be released. I'm not doing live previews anymore, you guys, just because like for time's sake, it's a lot quicker if I upload something that's about 12 to 15 minutes, just kind of outlining who's available and, the team that I want to see play and stuff like that. It's just easier for me in my schedule. So take a look out, be on the lookout for that. That will come out in the morning tomorrow for the sporting game. And then, of course, like we'll talk about sporting and all that kind of stuff after the game. Hopefully we go on to the next round of the Europa League. But I love you guys so much. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.